When I got pregnant in 12th grade, my parents kicked me out of the house into a freezing winter storm. 18 years later, they barged into my Atlanta penthouse demanding to meet the grandson they had once called a stain on our family. They needed his signature to unlock a $20 million trust fund. But the boy they were looking for did not exist, and the truth they were about to discover would completely destroy their perfect lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is massive success. My name is Nia. I am 35 years old, and my life today is a masterpiece of my own making. The soft jazz music playing in my living room matched the smooth amber color of the aged bourbon I was pouring into a heavy crystal glass. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, a city I had conquered on my own terms. I was wearing a tailored silk suit standing on imported hardwood floors, taking a slow, calculated sip of my drink, when a violent pounding echoed through the hallway. It was not a polite, hesitant knock. It was the frantic, aggressive hammering of people who believed the rules simply did not apply to them. Before my private security detail could fully intercept the threat, my heavy mahogany double doors flew wide open. There, standing in my elegant foyer, bringing the bitter, toxic chill of my past right into my safe haven, were my parents. Deacon Calvin and his perfectly put-together wife, Vivienne. My mother shoved past the security guard, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble, and slammed her handbag onto my kitchen island. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing after 18 years of absolute punishing silence. Instead, she glared at me with the exact same cold, calculating eyes that had haunted my teenage nightmares. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with unearned authority. "Go get my 18-year-old grandson right now. Tell Malik his family is here." I did not flinch. The camera of my mind captured every detail of their desperation. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the rich liquid burn the back of my throat, savoring the absolute absurdity of the moment. I walked gracefully around the island, closing the distance between us, looking down at the woman who had birthed me, but never truly mothered me. "It is incredibly funny that you are here," I said, my voice completely steady and dangerously quiet. I distinctly remember a freezing December night in Chicago. I was 17, my water had just broken, and I was bleeding heavily on the front porch steps of your pristine, highly mortgaged house. You stood in the doorway, looked down at my terrified face, and told me that a house of God does not harbor pregnant strays who bring shame to the congregation. So tell me, Mother, why did the righteous deacon and his flawless wife drive 500 miles to Atlanta just to track down the very shame they kicked out into a blizzard? My father stepped forward, his face flushed with deep, ugly indignation. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the patriarchal authority he commanded at his megachurch, as if his booming pulpit voice held any weight in a home I paid for. "Do not dare take that disrespectful tone with your mother," he barked, pointing a thick, trembling finger at my face. "You have hidden that boy from his rightful family for 18 years. We are not here to play games with you, Nia. Next week is his 18th birthday, and we do not have time for your childish bitterness." I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms, a genuine mocking smile forming on my lips. "You drove all this way for a birthday party?" I asked, letting out a soft chuckle. "We both know you do not care about birthdays, you do not care about me, and you certainly never cared about a child you threw into the freezing street to protect your church reputation. So what is the real reason you are trespassing in my home right now?" My father dropped his holy self-righteous facade, his eyes flashing with a desperate, all-consuming greed. "Your great-grandfather Ezekiel set up a legacy trust before he passed away." Calvin snapped, his voice dropping to a low, urgent growl. $20 million, and it automatically activates the moment the eldest male heir turns 18. Malik is the key to that money. We need his signature on a legal conservatorship agreement, so your mother and I can manage the funds. You owe us for raising you, and that boy owes his grandparents. Bring him down here right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and have you arrested for custodial interference and kidnapping an heir. He stepped closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, a bullying tactic that used to make me cower and cry as a child. The heavy scent of his cheap cologne mixed with the panic radiating from his pores. But I was not a frightened child anymore. I was a woman who had built an entire financial empire from the dirt they had so casually thrown on me. I looked at the two people who had broken my heart, realizing they had absolutely no power over me anymore. "You want to call the police?" I asked softly, stepping right into his personal space, watching the sudden fearful flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You want to bring the law into my house and threaten me? Be my absolute guest. But considering the storm that is about to hit your perfect little lives, you might want to call your lawyer first." I did not even have time to watch the fear fully settle into my father's eyes before a sharp voice sliced through the tension in the room. A rapid visual shift would catch the exact moment my golden child sister Jasmine stepped out from the shadows of the arched entryway. Right beside her stood her husband Connor. Connor gripped a leather briefcase as if it were a shield and a weapon all at once. The perspective shifted low, gazing up at his face, capturing the sneering, unearned superiority he wore like a second skin. He adjusted his tie, stepping forward to place himself protectively in front of my parents, embodying the ultimate white savior coming to rescue his poor, distressed in-laws from their rogue daughter. He cleared his throat, projecting his voice to fill the penthouse using that specific slow cadence reserved for people he deemed uneducated. "Let us calm down and look at the facts here." Nia Connor began snapping his briefcase open on my dining table. He pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in a blue legal folder. "What your father is trying to explain in simple terms, so you can understand, is that you are walking a very dangerous line regarding custodial interference. You cannot simply hide a primary beneficiary from a court-mandated trust reading. I have a court order right here, signed by a Fulton County judge, demanding the immediate presentation of Malik Ezekiel into the custody of his legal grandparents." He tapped the paper with a gold pen, looking at me as if I were a squatter facing eviction, rather than the owner of the very floor he was standing on. "If you refuse to produce the boy tonight," Connor continued, leaning over the marble island, "I will personally file a subpoena tomorrow morning. We will have federal marshals knocking on this beautiful door of yours. You will face charges for fraud, child concealment, and obstruction. We are trying to do this the easy way. We are trying to keep you out of a jail cell. Be smart. Do not let your petty teenage grievances ruin your life all over again. Just sign the release forms and bring the boy out." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply let my eyes travel slowly up and down his frame, taking my time to evaluate the man standing in my home. The camera of my mind pushed in slowly, isolating him from the group, capturing every flaw in his presentation. I noticed the slight fraying at the cuffs of his shirt. I noticed the way the jacket of his supposedly bespoke suit hung just a little too loosely on his shoulders, revealing a man who was shrinking under invisible burdens. "Connor," I said, setting my bourbon glass down with a soft, definitive clink. "That is a very impressive performance, truly. But before you threaten me with federal marshals, you might want to update your wardrobe. That charcoal suit is from 3 seasons ago, and if I am not mistaken, your partners at that mediocre boutique law firm of yours just voted to significantly reduce your equity share last quarter." Connor froze. The smug, condescending smile instantly vanished from his pale face, replaced by a sudden flush of deep red. I stepped closer, resting my hands on the cool marble, entirely invading his space. "You see," I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear, "when you try to explain trust law to a woman in her own home, you should make sure your own legal house is in order. You are standing here threatening me with a fraudulent court order that you likely drafted in a panic this afternoon because your firm is drowning in debt. You think you can intimidate me with big legal words because you still see me as the scared, pregnant 17-year-old girl your wife used to mock. But I am not that girl. And you are certainly not the high-powered legal eagle you pretend to be at family dinners." The silence in the room was absolute deafening. I had hit the exact nerve I was aiming for. Connor opened his mouth to stammer a response to try and regain the upper hand, but the truth had completely stripped him of his armor. He looked back at Jasmine, his confidence shattered silently, begging his wife to intervene. Jasmine could not handle the humiliation of her perfect husband being dismantled in under 60 seconds. She lunged forward, pushing Connor aside, her face twisted in an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her designer heels stomped against the floor as she pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "How dare you speak to my husband like that?" Jasmine shrieked, the volume of her voice shattering the quiet luxury of my penthouse. "You are nothing. You are a bitter, childless high school dropout who got lucky with a few investments. You have spent your entire pathetic life jealous of me. Jealous of my marriage. Jealous of my children. Jealous because our parents actually loved me and threw you out like the trash you are. You think living in a fancy high-rise makes you better than us. It does not. You are still the same miserable embarrassment you always were." I watched my sister hyperventilate, her chest heaving as she tried to crush me with the weight of my past. She wanted to see me break. She wanted to see the tears that used to flow so freely when we were younger. But I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating satisfaction. Jasmine was entirely predictable. She had always used her status as the golden child to shield herself from reality, relying on our parents' money and her husband's supposed prestige to prop up her fragile ego. But she was standing on a house of cards, and she did not even know that I was holding the match. I let her finish her screaming fit. I waited until she ran out of breath, until the echo of her insults faded into the high ceilings of my living room. I smiled warmly, refusing to give her the reaction she desperately craved. Then I reached into the pocket of my blazer and slowly pulled out a sleek silver tablet, ready to show my golden sister exactly who was actually paying for her perfect life. The silver tablet catches the ambient light of the penthouse as I place it deliberately on the cool marble of the kitchen island. Jasmine is still breathing heavily from her outburst, her chest heaving beneath her designer silk blouse. The camera pushes in slowly on my face, blurring out the frantic energy of my sister and the arrogant posturing of her husband. The frame isolates me entirely, a visual representation of absolute unshakable control amidst their desperate chaos. Let her talk, I tell myself. Let her dig the grave just a little bit deeper. Jasmine takes my silence as submission, a tragic miscalculation she has made since we were children. She crosses her arms, a triumphant, ugly smirk replacing her rage. "You have no idea what real success looks like, Nia," she spits out, stepping closer to the island. "You stumbled into some lucky investments, but you are still just a welfare queen, playing dress-up in a glass tower. I built a real business. My luxury boutique in Buckhead is the talk of Atlanta. I have a dedicated staff. I have high net worth clients who actually respect me. I contribute to society and uphold the family name while you sit up here hoarding whatever pennies you scammed out of the market. You are nothing compared to me. You will always be nothing compared to me." I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It is not a smile of malice, but of pure clinical amusement. I reach out and tap the screen of the silver tablet, waking it from sleep mode. I do not look at Connor, and I do not look at my parents, who are standing rigidly in the background, fully expecting me to cower. I keep my eyes locked entirely on Jasmine. "A boutique in Buckhead," I say softly, tasting the words as they leave my mouth. "The Magnolia Room, is it not? Prime real estate, incredible foot traffic, astronomical overhead." With a precise flick of my wrist, I slide the sleek iPad across the polished marble. It glides perfectly, stopping exactly an inch from Jasmine's manicured hands. "I highly suggest you take a very close look at the document on that screen, Jasmine," I say, my voice dropping to a conversational, deadly whisper. Connor, ever the protective, arrogant lawyer, steps forward to intercept the device. "Do not look at whatever garbage she fabricated, Jasmine," he says, reaching for the tablet with his chest puffed out. "She is just trying to deflect from the fact that she is harboring a fugitive heir and facing federal charges." But as his hand grasps the device, His eyes catch the official Fulton County seal on the digital document. His hand freezes. He pulls the tablet closer, his brow furrowing, as his supposedly brilliant legal mind processes the undeniable notarized property records glowing brightly on the high-definition screen. "What is this?" Connor mutters, his voice losing every ounce of its previous bravado. He scrolls down, his eyes darting frantically across the lines of text. "This is the deed to the commercial building on Peachtree Road, the building where the boutique is located." "That is exactly right, Connor," I reply, leaning forward slightly and resting my elbows on the marble. "I bought that building 2 years ago through a blind holding company. I am the sole owner of the property, which makes me your wife's landlord." I watch the color drain entirely from Jasmine's face. Her triumphant smirk shatters instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She lunges for the tablet, but Connor pulls it out of her reach, his eyes glued to the second document I had preloaded onto the screen. "Scroll to the next tab, Connor," I instruct him cheerfully. "You will find the current accounting ledger for the Magnolia Room. Your brilliant, successful wife is currently 4 months behind on her commercial lease. She owes my management company upwards of $80,000 in back rent, late fees, and contractual penalties. In fact, I have a team of corporate lawyers who are significantly better dressed than you drafting a formal eviction notice as we speak. I plan to have the locks changed and her inventory seized by Monday morning." Connor stares at the screen, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. He turns slowly to look at Jasmine. His expression is no longer that of a condescending white savior, protecting his distressed, fragile wife. It is the terrified look of a man who realizes he is legally bound to a massive, expensive liability. "You told me the boutique was breaking sales records this quarter," Connor says, his voice tight with suppressed, shaking fury. "You told me you needed that $50,000 bridge loan from my personal savings just to expand your inventory because demand was so high. Where did that money go, Jasmine?" Jasmine stammers, taking a desperate step back from her husband. "Connor, honey, I can explain everything. The retail market is just experiencing a slight seasonal dip. It is a temporary cash flow issue. Nia is just trying to cause trouble between us. Do not listen to her. She is a liar. She hacked those documents to ruin my life." But Connor is a lawyer, and he knows a certified bank ledger when he sees one. He is no longer listening to her frantic excuses. He slams the iPad down on the counter with a loud crack. "A temporary cash flow issue," he yells, completely abandoning his polished professional demeanor. "You have been lying to me for months. I leveraged my own equity at the firm to give you that cash. If we lose that money, we lose the house in Alpharetta, Jasmine. My partners are already scrutinizing my billable hours, and you are secretly bankrupting us to keep up your ridiculous appearances." I stand back and watch the beautiful, chaotic destruction of their unified front. The conflict shifts entirely away from me, exploding with vicious intensity right in the middle of my kitchen. Jasmine begins to cry, producing real desperate tears this time, reaching out to grab Connor's arm. Connor forcefully shoves her hand away, his face twisted in absolute disgust. He paces the floor, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, muttering curses under his breath about financial ruin and divorce attorneys. My parents stand completely paralyzed in the foyer, watching their golden child's perfect marriage disintegrate in real time. They came into my home to intimidate me, to exert their holy authority, but they are quickly realizing they have walked blindly into a slaughterhouse. I pick up my glass of bourbon, take another slow sip, and enjoy the show. They wanted to talk about money and the law, and now they are choking on the reality of both. The sound of ice clinking against crystal in my glass finally broke the spell that held my mother captive. Vivian snapped out of her paralyzed stance, her pristine church lady facade cracking as raw maternal panic flooded her features. She practically shoved my father aside, rushing across the polished marble floor to insert herself between Connor and Jasmine. She reached out her hands, fluttering over Connor's rigid shoulders, frantically trying to smooth down the wrinkled fabric of his outdated suit jacket, attempting to play the ultimate peacemaker for a marriage that was currently bleeding out on my floor. "Connor, please," she begged, her voice taking on a desperate, high-pitched quality. "Do not listen to this absolute nonsense. Jasmine is a wonderful wife. She is a successful, brilliant entrepreneur. Nia is just doing what she always does. She is destroying things out of pure, unadulterated spite. Vivienne whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes completely devoid of the maternal warmth she so easily faked for the Sunday morning congregation. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at the silver tablet resting on the island. "You hacked those banking records!" She shrieked, the volume of her voice echoing shrilly against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. "That is the only logical explanation. You are a high school dropout who lived on the streets. You do not have the capital to buy prime commercial real estate in Buckhead. You stole money or you committed wire fraud, and now you are illegally altering property deeds to frame your sister and ruin her beautiful marriage. Connor, you are a lawyer. You know digital documents can be faked by hackers. Call the police on her right now. Have her arrested for cybercrime before she ruins everything." I did not move a single muscle. Looking at my mother over the rim of my bourbon glass, I studied the desperate, frantic flutter of her pulse at the base of her neck. The sheer audacity of her projecting her own criminal behavior onto me was almost poetic in its irony. I slowly set my glass down, keeping my gaze locked onto hers, letting the silence stretch until her heavy breathing was the only sound in the room. "I did not steal a dime, Mother," I said, my voice completely smooth, cutting through her hysteria like a surgical scalpel. "I built my wealth quietly, dollar by dollar, while you were busy pretending I died in the snow. But since you are so eager to discuss the fascinating topics of fraud, hacking, and stolen money, why do we not discuss how you paid for Jasmine and Connor's spectacular magazine cover plantation wedding 3 years ago?" Jasmine sniffled loudly, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks, looking genuinely confused. My father, who had been standing silently by the door like a forgotten, oversized prop, suddenly stood taller, sensing an attack on his provision. "I paid for that wedding," Calvin boomed, attempting to reclaim the bruised masculinity he wielded so effortlessly at his megachurch. "I cashed out my personal investments to give my eldest daughter the $150,000 celebration she deserved. It was an honest, hard-earned blessing from a father to a daughter. Do not you dare try to tarnish that holy day with your bitter lies." I let out a harsh, echoing laugh that stopped his approaching footsteps dead in their tracks. "Oh, Calvin," I said, shaking my head with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. "You really are blind, are you not? You did not cash out any investments for that wedding. Your investments tanked in the market a decade ago, and you have been living on credit ever since." I reached out and tapped the tablet screen again, swiping past the boutique's ledger to a third heavily redacted document I had preloaded. I rotated the screen so the massive bold text at the top was clearly visible to everyone standing in my kitchen. "I bought the debt portfolio of a struggling regional bank 6 months ago." I explained, watching the blood rapidly drain from my mother's face as she recognized the logo on the screen. "And you will never believe the fascinating piece of paper I found hiding in their commercial loan division." Vivienne gasped, taking a sudden stumbling step backward. She bumped hard into the island, her hands gripping the marble edge as if the floor had just dropped out beneath her feet. "Tell him, Vivienne," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that demanded absolute obedience. "Tell your husband how you really funded that lavish, carriage-drawn, champagne-soaked plantation wedding." When she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing in silent, suffocating terror. "I did it for her. She forged your signature, Calvin. She went behind the back of your prestigious church board, used her unrestricted access as the head deacon's wife, and took out a massive, entirely fraudulent second mortgage on the church property. Your sacred sanctuary, the building you hold over the entire community, as proof of your divine favor, is leveraged to the absolute hilt because your wife needed to show off to Connor's wealthy country club relatives." The silence that hit the room was physical, a suffocating wave of terror that paralyzed the air. Calvin turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at the woman he had been married to for nearly 40 years. His face, usually a robust, healthy brown, turned a mottled, sickening shade of purple. The thick veins in his neck bulged visibly against his starched white collar. "You did what to my church?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, suppressed rage that I had never heard from him before. Vivienne threw her hands up, stepping away from the counter, cornered like a trapped, panicked animal. "Calvin, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking as the perfect, pious church lady facade crumbled into absolute dust. "I had to do it. Connor's parents were paying for the rehearsal dinner at the country club. They were bringing state senators and judges to the ceremony. We could not just host a cheap, embarrassing reception in the church basement. We have a public image to uphold. I was going to pay it back. I was skimming a little from the building fund donations just until Jasmine's boutique took off and paid us back. It was the absolute worst thing she could have possibly said." Connor, who had been staring blankly at the floor, suddenly snapped his head up. His eyes darted from Jasmine, who was currently bankrupting him, to Vivienne, who had apparently funded his entire wedding with stolen church money. "My entire marriage is a criminal enterprise," Connor shouted, grabbing his briefcase from the counter, his knuckles stark white. "You people are completely insane. You are common thieves posing as high society. I am a licensed practicing attorney, and you just implicated me in a $150,000 federal fraud scheme." Calvin ignored Connor completely. He lunged forward with a guttural roar, grabbing Vivienne by the upper arms, shaking her violently enough that her expensive pearl necklace snapped. The pearls scattered across my imported hardwood floors, bouncing and rolling into the corners of the room like tiny hollow drops of hail. "You mortgaged the house of God for a party," Calvin roared, spittle flying from his lips as his holy persona vanished entirely. "The board is doing a full financial audit next week, Vivienne. If they see a second mortgage on that deed, I am finished. They will defrock me. They will send me to federal prison for embezzlement. You stupid, vain woman, you ruined my life." Jasmine screamed, rushing forward to pry her father's heavy hands off her mother's arms. "Do not touch her," she cried violently, shoving at Calvin's chest. "She did it for me. She did it because she actually loves me and wants to see me succeed, unlike you who secretly gambles away half your paycheck at the casino every single month." The secret hung in the air, instantly freezing the physical altercation. My father released Vivienne, stepping back, as if she had physically burned him, his eyes wide with shock. Jasmine clamped her hands over her mouth, realizing a fraction of a second too late that in her frantic panic to defend her mother, she had just exposed her father's darkest, most closely guarded secret to a room full of people. I stood perfectly still behind the safety of my marble island, watching the family unit entirely cannibalize itself, tearing each other to pieces and stripping away decades of lies, religious hypocrisy, and financial fraud, all while I simply stood there holding my glass. The chaotic symphony of my family tearing each other apart was suddenly interrupted by a deafening crash. Calvin, his face slick with a panicked sweat, slammed his massive fist down onto my pristine marble countertop. The sheer force of the blow rattled my crystal bourbon glass, sending a sharp, clear ring echoing through the penthouse. He turned his back on my mother, realizing that strangling his wife over a fraudulent mortgage would not solve his most immediate, desperate problem. He needed a scapegoat, and more importantly, he needed a savior. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest to project the terrifying patriarchal dominance that had kept our household in a state of constant fear for decades. He pointed a trembling, heavy finger directly at my face, stepping so close to the kitchen island that I could see the frantic pulse beating wildly in his neck. "You will stop this demonic foolishness right now, Nia," he bellowed, summoning the booming theatrical baritone he used to command thousands of people every Sunday morning. "You are standing in the presence of your father and a man of God. I demand your respect. I demand your obedience. You have poisoned this family with your bitterness for far too long. You will bring that boy out here. You will hand over those trust documents, and you will repent for the absolute disrespect you have shown to the people who gave you life." I did not back away. I did not avert my eyes. I leaned closer to him, letting the cool, clinical detachment in my gaze meet the frantic, burning desperation in his. "Respect," I repeated, rolling the word around in my mouth like a bitter pill. "A man of God. That is a fascinating title for you to claim, Calvin. Let us talk about the grace and mercy of the Almighty, shall we?" Let us talk about a freezing Tuesday night in December, exactly 18 years ago. Calvin flinched, a microscopic tightening of his jaw, but I did not let him speak. I kept my voice low, forcing him to lean in, forcing him to hear every single syllable. I was 17 years old. I was terrified. I was bleeding through my favorite denim skirt, clutching my stomach in absolute agony. I fell to my knees on the hardwood floor of your pristine foyer, begging for my father to help me. And do you remember what you were doing, Calvin? He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the floor, but I slammed my hand onto the marble, mimicking his earlier aggression, and forcing his eyes back to mine. Do you remember? I demanded, my voice cracking like a whip. You were sitting in your leather armchair by the fireplace, drinking a cup of chamomile tea, editing your upcoming Sunday sermon. And the topic of that sermon was divine grace. I remember the gold lettering on your leather-bound Bible. I remember the exact tone of your voice when you looked down at your own bleeding daughter and told me that my sin was a stain on your holy reputation. You told me to get out. You watched me crawl out the front door into a blinding, freezing snowstorm, and then you calmly locked the deadbolt behind me so you could finish writing about the unconditional love of Jesus Christ. Jasmine was completely silent now, her own marital disaster temporarily forgotten, as the ugly, buried truth of our family history was dragged kicking and screaming into the light. Vivian was weeping into her hands, unable to look at either of us. Calvin's chest he heaved. He tried to straighten his posture, tried to summon that righteous indignation once again. I was protecting my flock, he stammered, his voice, losing its thunderous resonance, reducing to a pathetic defensive rasp. You chose a life of sin. I had to make a hard, righteous decision as a spiritual leader. You did not make a righteous decision, I countered, taking another step forward until we were separated only by a few inches of marble. You made a public relations decision, because that is all your faith has ever been, Calvin. A shield, a business model, a convenient little mask to hide the rot underneath. And speaking of rot, let us talk about why you actually need this $20 million trust fund today. Calvin's eyes went completely wide. The angry purple flush of his skin instantly drained, leaving him looking sickly gray and incredibly old. He opened his mouth to speak, to issue another empty threat, but his vocal cords completely failed him. You think you are the only one who knows how to conduct an investigation? I asked, tilting my head and offering him a smile that held absolutely zero warmth. I have friends in very high places, Calvin. I know people who manage the digital infrastructure for the offshore accounts you are so fond of. I know exactly what you do when you tell the congregation you are going on a spiritual retreat to the Bahamas. You have a terrible habit of hitting the baccarat tables when you think nobody is watching. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning stark white, his entire body trembling violently. The man of God was completely crumbling, his holy armor stripped away to reveal a desperate, degenerate gambler. You have been systematically skimming from the church tithes for the last 5 years, I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the silent penthouse. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred directly from the community building fund into your private offshore accounts to cover your massive unpayable gambling debts. You thought you were untouchable. You thought your deacon board was too intimidated by your fiery sermons to ever question the ledgers. But the board is bringing in an independent third-party forensic accounting firm from Chicago next Thursday, are they not? Connor gasped from the background, his legal mind instantly calculating the severity of the crimes being exposed in my living room. Vivian let out a strangled, horrified sob, sliding down the side of the kitchen cabinets until she hit the floor. That is the real reason you drove 500 miles today, Calvin, I said, delivering the final fatal blow to his patriarchal dominance. You do not care about a grandson. You do not care about family legacy. You are drowning. You are staring down the barrel of a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. You need great-grandfather Ezekiel's $20 million to silently replace the stolen church funds before those auditors open the first ledger next week. You did not come here to reunite with your blood. You came here looking for a bailout. The echo of Jasmine's accusation hangs in the stifling air of the penthouse. Calvin is paralyzed, his eyes wide and vacant, as he stares at the woman he married, realizing his impending federal indictment is no longer a secret. Vivian remains crumpled against the base of my custom cabinetry, her quiet, pathetic sobs providing a pathetic soundtrack to their collective ruin. If my life were a cinematic production, this would be the exact moment the camera slowly dollies backward. The lens would widen, pulling away to capture the entire tableau of my beautiful, fractured family. The visual divide is stark and undeniable. On one side of the expansive marble island stand the peasants stripped of their holy armor and designer pretenses, drowning in a sea of debt fraud and bitter desperation. On the other side stands the queen, untouched, unbothered, and holding a glass of aged bourbon. Connor is the only one left with any fight in him, though it is not driven by righteous anger. It is driven by the pure primal panic of a cornered animal. He looks at his weeping wife, his ruined in-laws, and the silver tablet that effectively spells the end of his legal career. He realizes with terrifying clarity that his entire life is tethered to a sinking ship. He needs a lifeline, he needs capital, and he knows exactly where to find $20 million of it. With a sudden, frantic burst of energy, Connor lunges toward his battered leather briefcase. His hands are physically shaking as he snaps the brass clasps open. He digs past files and loose pens, his breathing ragged and shallow. He pulls out a thick, official-looking document bound in a blue legal backing. He steps up to the marble island, his chest heaving, his face flushed an ugly, blotchy red. He raises the document high in the air and brings it down onto the countertop with a violent, resounding smack. "That is a formal court summons." Connor snarls, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own financial terror. He points a trembling finger at the thick stack of paper. "You think you have won, Nia. You think you can stand up here in your glass tower and judge us. But you are forgetting the most important piece on the board. You are hiding the primary beneficiary of the Harrison estate. I am the legal counsel representing the biological grandparents, and we have a court-mandated trust reading scheduled for this Friday at 9 in the morning." He leans over the marble, his eyes wild, spit flying from his lips as he delivers his final, desperate ultimatum. "You will produce Malik at that reading. You will bring that boy to the Harrison law offices, or I swear to God, I will personally march down to the courthouse and see you arrested. I will file for immediate emergency custody based on custodial interference and financial fraud. I will have federal marshals drag you out of this penthouse in handcuffs, and we will take that boy anyway. Do not test me, Nia. We need that trust formalized, and you are entirely out of options." The sheer audacity of his threat washes over me. They threw me out into a freezing snowstorm when I was a pregnant, terrified 17-year-old girl. They told me the child growing inside me was a curse, a stain on their pristine reputation. They left us to die. And now, almost 2 decades later, that very same child is the heir to a $20 million empire, and they are demanding his presence to save them from federal prison and bankruptcy. The poetic justice of the universe is almost too sweet to bear. I set my bourbon glass down next to the silver tablet. I do not raise my voice. I do not match his frantic, pathetic energy. Instead, I slowly reach out and pick up the court summons. The paper is heavy, crisp, and completely meaningless to me. I hold it up to the ambient light of the kitchen, tracing the sharp, formal edge of the document with my manicured thumbnail. I take my time, letting the absolute silence of my dominance stretch until Connor shifts uncomfortably on his feet. I lower the document and look directly into Connor's bloodshot eyes. I let a warm, radiant smile spread across my face. It is a smile of total, unadulterated victory. "Do not worry yourself into an early heart attack, Connor," I say softly, my voice dripping with honeyed poison. "Malik will be exactly where he is supposed to be on Friday morning. I would not miss this trust reading for anything in the world." Connor blinks, clearly thrown off guard by my complete lack of resistance. He expects a fight. He expects me to scream, to tear up the paper, to deny them access to my son. My calm compliance completely short-circuits his panicked brain. He opens his mouth to issue another threat to try and regain some semblance of the upper hand, but I am entirely finished playing with them. I reach under the edge of the marble countertop and press the small, silent security button concealed beneath the lip. Less than 5 seconds later, the heavy oak double doors of my penthouse swing open. Marcus and David, my two private security contractors, step into the foyer. They are built like brick walls, dressed in immaculate dark suits, moving with silent, terrifying efficiency. Marcus catches my eye across the room. I give him a single subtle nod. "It is time for my guests to leave," I announce, my voice echoing coldly against the glass walls. "And please ensure they are escorted all the way to the street. I do not want them lingering in the lobby." Marcus and David move forward immediately. Connor tries to snatch his briefcase, but David is faster, placing a massive hand firmly on Connor's shoulder and spinning him toward the door. "Do not touch me," Connor barks, trying to shrug off the grip, but he is completely powerless against the security guard's sheer size. "I am leaving on my own." Jasmine scrambles to her feet, her face streaked with black makeup, her designer clothes rumpled and pathetic. She looks at me, her eyes burning with a toxic mixture of hatred and total defeat. "This is not over, Nia," she screams as Marcus gently but forcibly guides her by the arm toward the elevator. "You are going to pay for this. You are going to lose everything." Calvin and Vivian do not say a single word. My father moves like a broken man, his shoulders slumped, his eyes staring blankly ahead as he shuffles toward the exit. He looks decades older than the man who arrived 20 minutes ago. Vivian follows close behind him, her hands covering her face, stepping over the scattered pearls of her broken necklace. They are empty, ruined husks of the tyrants who used to rule my life. I stand perfectly still, watching the heavy oak doors click shut behind them, the mechanical hum of the private elevator engaging signals their final descent back down to the reality they created for themselves. The penthouse is suddenly enveloped in a beautiful, profound silence. I pick up my glass, taking a slow, satisfying drink of the amber liquid. Friday is going to be an absolutely spectacular day. The sharp, rhythmic click of my red-soled Louboutins against the imported Italian marble floor echoed through the cavernous lobby of the Harrison Trust corporate building in downtown Atlanta. The perspective tracks low and fast, staying right on the heels of my shoes, capturing the relentless driving pace of a woman walking into a war zone she has already won. I pushed open the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom without bothering to knock. The atmosphere inside the room shifted violently the exact second I crossed the threshold. They were already there, clustered together on one side of the massive mahogany conference table, like a pack of starving wolves. They had dressed in their absolute Sunday best for the occasion. My father wore a tailored three-piece suit that screamed false prosperity. My mother sat beside him in a pristine pearl-colored suit and matching fascinator, looking every inch the pious deacon's wife. Jasmine and Connor sat adjacent to them, their posture rigid, their eyes locked hungrily onto the thick stack of legal documents resting in the center of the table. Sitting at the head of the room was Mr. Sterling, the senior trust manager. He was a stern, older black man with a silver beard and an expression that explicitly stated he had zero tolerance for familial theatrics. As I walked into the room, 4 pairs of greedy, desperate eyes snapped toward me, immediately darting past my shoulders to the empty hallway behind me. They were looking for the prize. They were looking for the $20 million meal ticket they needed to save themselves from federal prison and total financial ruin. When the heavy glass doors clicked shut and they realized I had come entirely alone, the boardroom exploded into absolute chaos. "Where is he?" Vivian shrieked, jumping up so fast her heavy leather chair slammed into the credenza behind her. Her pristine facade dissolved instantly into manic panic. She hid him. She hid the boy. I knew she would do this. "Calvin, I told you she was going to hide him from us." Connor did not even hesitate. He ripped his smartphone out of his suit pocket, his hands shaking violently as he pulled up the keypad. "That is it," he yelled, pointing the phone at me like a loaded weapon. "That is a direct violation of a court order. I warned you, Nia. I told you exactly what would happen if you pulled a stunt like this. I am dialing 911 right now. I am getting the federal marshals down here to arrest you for custodial interference and criminal fraud. You are going to jail today." I calmly walked over to the empty side of the vast mahogany table, pulled out a leather executive chair, and gracefully took my seat. I crossed my legs, smoothing the fabric of my skirt, and offered Connor a warm, patronizing smile. "Dial them, Connor," I said, keeping my voice completely serene over the deafening noise of their panic. "Tell the dispatcher to send the police right up to the 50th floor. But while you have law enforcement on the line, you might want to ask them what the mandatory minimum sentencing is for a licensed attorney who knowingly submits forged financial documents to a federal judge. Because the moment those officers walk through those doors, I am handing them the digital footprint of the fake bridge loan you drafted to cover up your wife's bankruptcy." Connor froze, his thumb hovering over the screen. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He slowly lowered his phone, the threat of immediate arrest effectively neutralizing his bravado. Calvin, seeing his son-in-law falter, stepped into the void. He slammed his heavy fist onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal water glasses. He turned his imposing, furious frame toward Mr. Sterling, who was watching the entire spectacle with a look of quiet, clinical disgust. "Mr. Sterling, you are witnessing this woman's complete mental instability firsthand," Calvin barked, utilizing his booming preacher's voice to command the room. "She is a rogue, unfit mother who is actively defying the law. As the boy's biological grandparents, as upstanding God-fearing pillars of this community, we demand that you void her conservatorship immediately. My grandson belongs in our custody, and that trust needs to be transferred to my control today. The boy's future is at stake." "You mean your future is at stake, Calvin?" I interrupted smoothly. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "My father is currently facing an internal audit from his church board next Thursday. He needs to replace hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen tithes before the accountants realize he has been funding his severe gambling addiction with community donations. He does not want my son. He wants the Harrison Trust to pay off his bookies and keep him out of a federal penitentiary." Vivian let out a strangled gasp, clutching the pearls at her throat as if I had physically struck her. "It is a lie," she cried out, looking desperately at the trust manager. "She is a bitter, wicked child making up horrible stories to ruin her family." "Mr. Sterling, please, you have the paperwork. We have the legal right to claim our grandson and his assets. We brought the court summons. She is in violation. Hand the money over to us." Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He adjusted his gold-rimmed reading glasses, folded his hands neatly over the thick stack of trust documents, and looked at my parents with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. He had spent 40 years managing the fortunes of Atlanta's elite, and he could spot a pack of desperate drowning grifters from a mile away. He turned his attention to me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Miss Williams," Mr. Sterling said, his deep voice cutting through the remaining tension in the room, "the terms of the Harrison Trust explicitly state that the primary beneficiary must be physically present in this building of sound mind and legal standing to officially execute the transfer of the $20 million principal. Your family's legal counsel is correct on one very specific point. If the beneficiary is not produced this morning, the trust cannot be dispersed, and the contingency clauses regarding guardianship will be activated." Jasmine let out a sharp, triumphant breath, shooting me a look of pure venom. "You hear that?" she sneered, leaning across the table. "You overplayed your hand, Nia. You thought you were so smart kicking us out of your penthouse, but you just lost everything. You lose the money, and you lose the kid. We win." I picked up the crystal water glass in front of me, took a slow sip, and set it down precisely on the coaster. I looked at Jasmine, then at Connor, then at my parents, who were practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. "I did not overplay anything, Jasmine," I said softly. "I simply let all of you exhaust yourselves digging a hole you can never climb out of." I turned my attention back to Mr. Sterling, offering him a respectful, knowing nod. "Mr. Sterling, my son is not a fugitive, and I am certainly not hiding him from the law. I promised my family that Malik would be exactly where he is supposed to be at 9 o'clock this morning. And unlike my father, I always keep my promises." I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a heavy brass remote, and pressed the single button in the center. The automated mahogany double doors at the far end of the boardroom, leading to the private executive suites, slid open with a soft, mechanical hum. The entire room went dead silent as a tall, broad-shouldered young man stepped into the light. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his posture impeccably straight, his face a striking, undeniable reflection of my own. My family stared at him in absolute paralyzed shock, their brains entirely failing to comprehend the reality standing right in front of them. The echo of their vicious, cannibalistic screaming match inside my penthouse eventually faded into the highly satisfying memory of my private security contractors dragging my family out by their designer lapels. Connor had slammed his pathetic court summons on my marble counter, desperately demanding my son's presence, and I had smiled warmly, promising him the boy would be exactly where he was supposed to be. Now, 3 days later, the Friday showdown has officially arrived. The camera begins a slow, deliberate circular pan around the massive mahogany boardroom table inside the prestigious Harrison Trust corporate building in downtown Atlanta. The tension in the room is impossibly thick, suffocating the air and making every breath feel heavy. My family is already here, clustered together on one side of the vast table. They have dressed in their absolute Sunday best, a pathetic, transparent attempt to project authority and wealth. Calvin wears a tailored three-piece suit, desperately trying to mask the aura of a man facing a federal embezzlement indictment. Vivian sits beside him in a pristine, pearl-colored suit, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Jasmine and Connor sit rigid, practically drooling over the thick stacks of official trust documents resting in the center of the table. A fast-paced tracking shot follows the sharp rhythmic clicking of my red-soled Louboutins as I cross the polished marble floor. I push open the heavy frosted glass doors and step into the executive boardroom entirely alone. When they realize I do not have a terrified 18-year-old boy trailing behind me, all hell breaks loose instantly. "Where is he?" Vivian screams, her voice shattering the quiet professionalism of the corporate suite. She jumps up from her leather chair, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. "You hid him. You hid the boy from us." "Calvin, I told you she was going to do this. She is a wicked, deceitful child." Connor does not even hesitate. He rips his smartphone out of his suit jacket, his face flushing an ugly, blotchy red. "That is a direct violation of a federal court order, Nia," he barks, waving the phone in my direction. "I warned you what would happen. I am dialing 911 right now. I am getting the marshals down here to arrest you for custodial interference and criminal fraud." Calvin slams his heavy fist onto the mahogany table, turning his furious, bloodshot eyes toward the head of the room. Sitting there is Mr. Sterling, the senior trust manager. He is a stern, impeccably dressed older black man with a silver beard and an expression that explicitly states he has absolutely zero tolerance for familial theatrics. "Mr. Sterling, you are witnessing this woman's complete mental instability firsthand." Calvin demands, utilizing his booming preacher's voice to command the room. "She is a rogue, unfit mother who is actively defying the law. As the boy's biological grandparents, as upstanding pillars of this community, we demand that you void her rights immediately. Hand the money over to us. My grandson belongs in our custody, and that trust needs to be transferred to my control today." I smoothly pull out an executive chair and take my seat opposite them, crossing my legs with calculated elegance. I do not raise my voice. I look at Connor, who is standing with his phone pressed to his ear, desperately trying to salvage his own financial ruin. He thinks his law degree makes him the smartest person in the room. He is about to learn a very expensive lesson. Connor terminates his call, realizing the dispatcher will not send a heavily armed strike team to a corporate boardroom over a trust dispute. He grabs great-grandfather Ezekiel's original will from the table, practically shoving it in Mr. Sterling's face. He clears his throat, adopting his most arrogant, condescending courtroom posture. "The document is absolutely clear," Connor sneers, quoting the text with aggressive precision. "The $20 million must be transferred to Malik, born of Nia, upon reaching 18 years of age. The boy is 18 today. He is not physically present to sign the transfer documents because his mother is illegally concealing him. Therefore, she forfeits all fiduciary rights and the estate defaults to the grandparents. Arrest her and release the funds. I let out a soft, echoing laugh that stops his arrogant rant dead in its tracks. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling, offering him a warm, respectful smile. "Mr. Sterling," I say calmly, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal cadence, "would you be so kind as to read Clause 4B for the brilliant attorney standing across from me?" Connor scoffs, rolling his eyes in exaggerated disbelief. "There is no Clause 4B, he snaps. I reviewed the entire file. I requested the full discovery. You are stalling." Mr. Sterling ignores Connor entirely. He adjusts his gold-rimmed reading glasses, his face a mask of absolute unbothered professionalism. He reaches into his leather portfolio and pulls out a single heavily guarded document bearing a thick wax seal. He breaks the seal with a sharp crack that echoes like a gunshot in the silent room. Clause 4B of the Ezekiel Harrison Trust, amended and notarized prior to the deceased's passing. Mr. Sterling reads his deep voice, carrying a tone of absolute legal finality. The document explicitly states that the primary benefactor is not simply the biological child, but the legal entity established to protect his future. The $20 million principal is not tied to a physical signature from the young man. It is strictly mandated to be wired directly and exclusively to the entity known as MALIK. Connor freezes. His mouth drops open slightly, his eyes darting from Mr. Sterling to the document. "What are you talking about?" Connor stammers, the arrogant courtroom bluster vanishing in an instant. "What entity?" "He is a person. MALIK is an acronym, Connor." I say, letting the cold, hard reality of his failure crash down onto his shoulders. The management of assets, legacies, and investments of kin. It is a closed, private corporate holding company. Great-grandfather Ezekiel knew exactly what my parents were. He knew they were greedy, status-obsessed hypocrites who would eventually try to bleed my son dry the second he came of age. So he helped me build an impenetrable fortress. I lean forward, placing both of my hands flat on the mahogany table. The trust does not require my son's physical signature today, because the entity known as MALIK was legally incorporated in the state of Delaware 5 years ago. And I am the sole uncontestable majority shareholder of that entity until my son turns 25. You did not read the sealed addendum because it was restricted under corporate privacy laws that your mediocre, failing boutique law firm lacked the security clearance to access. The air violently leaves the room. Calvin slumps back into his chair, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray as the reality of his impending federal indictment crashes over him. He is not getting the money. The $20 million is locked inside a corporate vault that he can never touch. His church board audit next week will expose his embezzlement, and he will go to federal prison. Vivian begins to weep loudly, an ugly, guttural sound of pure defeat. Jasmine covers her face, realizing her husband's career is officially over, and they are entirely bankrupt. Connor stares at me, his chest heaving, his gold pen slipping from his sweaty fingers and clattering loudly onto the polished wood. "You set us up," he whispers, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. "I did not set you up, Connor," I reply, straightening my posture. "I just let you be exactly who you have always been. Arrogant, entitled, and completely blinded by your own greed." I turn my attention back to the trust manager. "Mr. Sterling, please execute the wire transfer to the corporate holding account immediately. We are finished here." The soft electronic chime of Mr. Sterling's silver tablet slicing through the dead silence of the boardroom was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the digital confirmation of a $20 million wire transfer successfully clearing into my corporate holding account. The impenetrable fortress I had spent 5 years building was now fully funded, completely locked, and entirely out of their reach. Mr. Sterling neatly gathered his documents, snapped his leather portfolio shut, and stood up. He offered me a single respectful nod before turning his back on my ruined family and walking out the frosted glass doors. Connor remained frozen in his chair, his mouth hanging slightly open, his eyes completely vacant as he stared at the spot where the trust documents had been just moments before. He was a man who had just watched his entire career, his marriage and his financial future vaporize into thin air. Jasmine sat beside him, her hands trembling violently in her lap, her carefully manicured nails digging deep into the expensive fabric of her designer skirt. But it was Vivian who broke the silence. She could not comprehend the legal maneuvering. She could not process the concept of a corporate entity absorbing the wealth. Her mind, desperate and completely frantic, clung to the only tangible lifeline she thought she had left. But the boy... Vivian stammered, her voice a fragile, raspy whisper that barely carried across the polished mahogany table. If the money went to a company, where is the child? Where is my grandson Nia? You cannot keep him from us forever. A biological heir has rights. We have rights. We can still petition the court for visitation. We can bring him home. Calvin's head snapped up at her words. A sickening, pathetic spark of hope reignited in his bloodshot eyes. He straightened his shoulders, clinging to this final, desperate delusion. Yes. Calvin breathed heavily, leaning forward and planting his sweaty palms on the table. The boy. You have to produce the boy. He is our flesh and blood. We can offer him a proper home, a righteous upbringing. He does not have to stay with a mother who hides him like a criminal. We will tell the judge you are alienating him from his family. I sat perfectly still in my executive leather chair. The ambient lighting of the boardroom felt completely sterile, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in their own breathless anticipation. I looked at Vivian's tear-stained face, then at Calvin's desperate, greedy eyes. You want to know where my son is? I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper that commanded absolute attention. You want to meet the grandson you suddenly care so deeply about? I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool surface of the table. I did not blink. I did not avert my gaze. I locked my eyes directly onto my father's face, watching the desperate hope flicker in his pupils. Let us take a walk down memory lane, Calvin, I said, my tone devoid of any warmth or humanity. Let us go back exactly 18 years. Do you remember the weather that Tuesday night in December? I do. It was 12 degrees outside. There was a blizzard warning in effect for the entire metropolitan area. The wind chill made it feel like breathing in razor blades. And I was out in it wearing nothing but a denim skirt and a thin cotton sweater because my loving, righteous father had just dragged me by my hair and thrown me out the front door. Vivian let out a soft, trembling whimper, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. I was terrified. I continued, my voice steady, slicing through their pathetic defenses like a scalpel. I was 17 years old and I was bleeding. I begged you to let me stay just for the night. I begged you to call an ambulance, but you told me I was a whore. You told me my sin was a cancer on your holy ministry, and you locked the heavy brass deadbolt while I pounded on the wood with my bare, freezing hands. Calvin swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. He tried to look away, but I refused to let him break eye contact. I walked for 3 miles in that blizzard. I stated every word, falling like a heavy stone in the quiet room. 3 miles through knee-deep snow, trying to reach the free clinic on the edge of town. My shoes soaked through in the first 10 minutes. My legs went completely numb. But the worst part was the pain in my abdomen. It felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. I kept holding my stomach, praying to a God I thought you represented, begging him to save my baby. Jasmine was staring at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization dawning in her expression. Connor looked physically sick, sinking lower into his expensive leather chair. I never made it to the clinic, I said softly. I collapsed in the alleyway behind an abandoned strip mall. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see the streetlights. I lay there on the freezing concrete, surrounded by trash and ice. And that is where I felt him leave my body. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I lay in that alley for 4 hours, bleeding into the snow, watching the bright red turn completely black in the dark. I whispered, delivering the final fatal blow. I nearly froze to death. A sanitation worker found me at dawn and called the paramedics. They rushed me to the emergency room, but it was far too late. I sat back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I looked at the four people across from me, watching their last shred of hope turn to ash. "There is no boy," I declared, my voice ringing with total uncompromising finality. "There is no biological heir for you to parade in front of a judge. There is no grandson for you to manipulate or leverage for sympathy. He died 18 years ago. He died the exact night you locked the door and went to sleep in your warm, comfortable beds." The paralysis that gripped my family was a spectacular thing to witness. They were completely frozen, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. But the look on their faces was not grief. They were not mourning the loss of a child. They were not weeping for the innocent life that had ended in a freezing alleyway. They were paralyzed by the horrifying, suffocating realization that the human bargaining chip they desperately needed to access the $20 million simply did not exist. Calvin's mouth opened and closed silently like a suffocating fish. His massive chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The biological grandson, the leverage he needed to save himself from a 20-year federal prison sentence, was a phantom. A ghost I had resurrected in the form of a corporate acronym just to watch them destroy themselves trying to catch it. Vivienne let out a long, high-pitched wail, her entire body shaking as she slumped forward onto the mahogany table. Jasmine buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the reality of their total bankruptcy settled over her. Connor simply stared at the wall, a hollow, defeated shell of a man. "You came here looking for a savior," I said, standing up from my chair and smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. "But all you found was the ghost of the child you murdered. I hope you think about him every single day you spend in a federal penitentiary, Calvin." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on the weeping, broken remnants of my family, my red Louboutins clicking sharply against the marble floor as I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them alone with the cold, undeniable truth of their own destruction. The echo of shattering glass violently interrupted the dead silence of the boardroom. Connor had blindly knocked over a heavy crystal water pitcher in his frantic scramble to his feet. The camera executes a sudden, violent snap zoom right into Connor's panicked, sweat-slicked face. His eyes are bulging, darting wildly between my retreating figure and the stoic form of Mr. Sterling. The shock of the dead child had barely registered before his predatory legal instincts violently rebooted his brain. He saw a loophole. He saw a microscopic crack in my armor, and he threw his entire ruined life at it. Then the trust is null and void. Connor screams, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek that echoes painfully off the glass walls. "Do you hear me, Mr. Sterling? The biological prerequisite is completely invalidated. If the child died 18 years ago, the beneficiary does not exist in the eyes of the law. You cannot wire $20 million to a corpse. The trust condition fails entirely. And under Georgia state law, when a direct lineal trust fails to execute the principal balance, immediately defaults to the next of kin." He slams his palms onto the mahogany table, leaning forward with wild, desperate eyes. "It defaults to Deacon Calvin. We get the money." The effect of his words is instant and utterly grotesque. The horror that had momentarily paralyzed my family vanishes, instantly replaced by a ravenous, foaming greed. Calvin shoots up from his chair, his previous despair completely forgotten. He does not care that he has just learned he is indirectly responsible for his own grandchild freezing to death in a snowy alleyway. The only thing that matters to him is the sudden miraculous possibility of $20 million landing in his bank account. "He is right," Calvin bellows, his deep voice shaking with an ugly, toxic hope. "The boy is dead. The conditions are impossible to meet. Mr. Sterling, as the patriarch of this family, I demand you release those funds to my private accounts immediately." I do not flinch. I do not run. I stand perfectly still, absorbing their vile, predictable display of inhumanity. And then I laugh. It starts low in my chest and erupts into a rich, echoing laugh that bounces off the high ceilings. It is the laugh of a woman who has spent 2 decades anticipating exactly how stupid her enemies truly are. The camera shifts, executing a smooth, continuous tracking shot that follows me as I step away from the door and walk back around the perimeter of the massive mahogany table. I reach into my designer tote bag and pull out a thick stack of pristine gold embossed folders. I drop the first folder directly in front of Calvin. It hits the wood with a loud, definitive smack. I drop the second in front of Vivian, who flinches as if I had struck her. The third goes to Jasmine, and the final folder slides right into Connor's trembling hands. Open them. I command, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air. Connor's fingers are shaking so violently he can barely lift the heavy cardstock cover. His bloodshot eyes scan the first page, darting wildly across the bold, capitalized text of the state incorporation filings. Read it out loud, Connor, I instruct, leaning slightly over the back of his chair. Use that expensive law degree one last time before your firm fires you for gross malpractice. Read the full legal name of the entity you just tried to steal from. Connor swallows hard. Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital. He reads, his voice a weak, gravelly whisper. M-A-L-I-K-L. Exactly, I say, straightening my posture and smoothing my skirt. When I said management of assets earlier, that was merely the operational DBA I fed to your paralegals to keep you off the scent. The true registered entity, the sole beneficiary named in Ezekiel's sealed addendum, is Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital. It is a Tier 1 venture capital firm, and I am the founder, the CEO, and the sole majority shareholder. Calvin stares at the papers in front of him, his chest rising and falling in sharp, panicked jerks. But Ezekiel Calvin stammers, his booming preacher's voice reduced to a pathetic wheeze. Ezekiel would never fund a secular company instead of his own bloodline. He believed in family. He believed in the church. Ezekiel believed in legacy. I correct him, walking slowly toward the head of the table. And he knew exactly what you were doing to his legacy, Calvin. He knew you were bleeding the congregation dry to fund your offshore gambling habits. He knew about the embezzled donations, the falsified tax returns, and the secret accounts in the Caymans. He knew absolutely everything. Calvin's face turns a sickening shade of gray. He grips his chest, his eyes wide with a terror that goes far deeper than financial ruin. It is the terror of a narcissist realizing he was never the smartest man in the room. I lean forward, placing both hands flat on the table, trapping Calvin in my uncompromising gaze. While you were busy kicking your bleeding 17-year-old daughter out into a blizzard to protect your hypocritical public image, Ezekiel was sitting by my hospital bed. He was there when I woke up. He was there when the doctors told me I had lost my baby. And he was there when I promised I would never let you victimize another person in this family ever again. Ezekiel looked at me in that hospital room. I continue, my voice echoing with quiet, furious power. And he said, Calvin is a parasite dressed in preacher's cloth. He will devour this family's wealth and leave nothing but rot. So Ezekiel made a choice. He decided to bypass your generation entirely. He secretly seed-funded my corporation. He gave me the capital, the legal architects, and the structural blueprint to build an impenetrable financial fortress. I pick up the incorporation document from the center of the table and hold it up to the light. Look at the date, Connor. Look at the exact date this entity was legally incorporated in the state of Delaware. Connor's eyes dart to the bottom of the page. December 14th, he whispers, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Exactly 18 years ago today, I say, letting a cold, victorious smile spread across my face. I founded this venture capital firm on the exact day I miscarried my son. I poured my grief, my rage, and my absolute brilliance into building it. And today, exactly 18 years later, Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital has reached the age of majority. MALIK turned 18 today. The legal conditions of the trust are fully and irrevocably met. Jasmine suddenly stands up, her chair screeching violently against the floor. She turns on Connor, her face twisted in a mask of pure panic and unhinged rage. You told me this was a lock. You told me we were getting $5 million today to pay off the IRS. What are we supposed to do, Connor? They're going to seize the house. They're going to seize the cars. We have nothing. Connor covers his face with his hands, letting out a pathetic guttural sob. There is nothing we can do, Jasmine. The corporate veil is bulletproof. The trust is executed. We are finished. Vivian looks at me, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks. Her carefully constructed high society facade has completely melted away. Nia, please, she begs, her voice shaking with a pathetic, desperate vulnerability. We are your family. Your father is going to go to federal prison. The scandal will destroy our reputation in Atlanta forever. You cannot leave us like this. You have $20 million. You could pay his restitution. You could save our home. I looked down at the woman who stood silently by while I was thrown out into the freezing snow. I look at the man who would have gladly sold my unborn child to save his own skin. Save your home, I repeat, letting out a sharp, mocking scoff. You lost the right to a home the night you locked me out of mine. And federal prison is exactly where parasites belong. I pick up my designer tote bag and slide the strap over my shoulder. I look at the trust manager, Mr. Sterling, who has been watching the entire exchange with a look of quiet, profound, professional respect. Thank you for your impeccable service today, Mr. Sterling, I say, my voice returning to a smooth executive cadence. The wire transfer has been confirmed on my end. MALIK is fully operational and fully funded. I do not wait for another word from my ruined family. I turn and walk toward the frosted glass doors, the sound of my heels echoing like a judge's gavel slamming down for the final time. I step out into the bright sunlit hallway of the executive suite, leaving the darkness, the greed, and the rotting legacy of Calvin and Vivian locked inside that boardroom forever. I press the button for the elevator, pull out my smartphone, and dial the chief operating officer of my firm. The capital has cleared, I say, watching the elevator doors slide open. Tell the board we are ready to acquire our next target. The camera immediately cuts back to the interior of the boardroom, tilting into a sharp, disorienting Dutch angle that captures the absolute chaos I left in my wake. Connor is practically vibrating with panic. His pristine white savior complex, the arrogant, unshakable belief that he alone could outsmart my family and secure their fortune, has completely shattered into jagged little pieces. He is violently flipping through the thick stack of corporate filings I dropped in front of him, his sweaty fingers tearing the heavy parchment paper as he desperately searches for a single flawed clause or a misplaced signature. He is breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive tailored suit, knowing that his entire career and marriage are entirely dependent on finding a microscopic crack in my armor. "You cannot do this!" Connor yells, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek as he slams his fist onto the mahogany table and points a trembling finger at the trust manager. A corporation cannot be a grandson. It is a business entity, not flesh and blood. The original trust language specifically uses the phrase, born of Nia. A Delaware limited liability company is incorporated. It is not born. This is a gross misinterpretation of fiduciary intent. The trust is null and void, Mr. Sterling. The conditions have failed. The money legally defaults to the next of kin, which means Deacon Calvin gets the $20 million. As a licensed attorney, I am officially putting you on notice that if you execute this transfer, you will be personally liable for federal wire fraud and criminal embezzlement. Mr. Sterling does not even blink. He sits at the head of the long table, an immovable pillar of absolute legal authority. He looks at Connor over the rim of his gold spectacles, his expression entirely devoid of anything resembling sympathy or concern. He adjusts his immaculate silk tie, radiating the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you hold the winning hand in a high-stakes game of corporate warfare. You are throwing legal temper tantrums to mask your own profound incompetence, Connor. Mr. Sterling says, his voice a smooth, lethal baritone that instantly commands the room and forces the panicked lawyer into silence. You rely on standard definitions because you lack the intellect to comprehend exceptional strategy. Corporate personhood absolutely applies here fully and irrevocably. But Ezekiel Harrison did not merely rely on standard corporate personhood to secure his legacy. He went a monumental step further to ensure this money would never end up in the hands of Deacon Calvin. Mr. Sterling taps the screen of his silver tablet, pulling up a deeply buried, heavily encrypted addendum. He did not just name the LLC as a beneficiary. 6 months before his passing, Ezekiel utilized a highly specialized airtight legal mechanism. He legally adopted the corporate entity known as Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital. He petitioned a closed court utilizing a vanguard legal strategy and legally bound the entity to the Harrison estate as his direct recognized heir. He legally redefined the parameters of his own lineage, specifically to bypass Calvin entirely. The corporation is the grandson. Connor's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His legal mind, accustomed to bullying weaker opponents and exploiting basic technicalities in local courtrooms, cannot process the sheer, staggering magnitude of Ezekiel's chess move. The realization hits him with the force of a speeding freight train. He has not just lost a case. He has been fundamentally outplayed by a legal strategy so advanced and so fiercely protective that it makes his expensive law degree look completely worthless. This was never a dispute over a biological child. Mr. Sterling continues, his gaze shifting to Calvin, who is slumped in his chair, graying and hyperventilating. This was a quarantine protocol. Ezekiel knew you were bleeding your congregation dry to pay off your illicit gambling debts, Calvin. He knew the federal auditors were closing in on your megachurch. He knew you would try to use your biological grandson as a human shield to pay your massive restitution. He anticipated your boundless greed, and he built a financial vault you could never breach. Mr. Sterling turns his attention back to his console, his fingers hovering over the glowing keyboard. The legal age of majority for the entity was established as 18 years from the date of incorporation. Today is that exact day. The conditions are met in full. The beneficiary is legally recognized. The transfer is authorized. With a single, deliberate motion, Mr. Sterling presses a key on his console. Instantly, the massive wall-mounted digital screen at the far end of the boardroom flickers to life. The glowing blue light casts a sickly, terrifying pallor over the faces of my family. A secure banking interface appears on the screen, dominating the room with its crisp, undeniable reality. A loading bar pulses for 3 agonizing seconds, stretching the tension until it feels like the air itself might shatter. Then, a bold confirmation screen flashes in bright, undeniable green lettering. Transfer initiated. Recipient M. ALIK Holdings, LLC. Amount $20 million. Status cleared. The family watches the digital transfer on the boardroom screen in absolute suffocating agony. The $20 million they had already spent in their minds, the money that was supposed to save them from federal prison, total bankruptcy, and crushing public humiliation, is permanently gone. It is locked safely away in a corporate account they can never touch. Calvin lets out a guttural, terrifying sound, a cross between a broken sob and a violent choke. He grabs his chest, his knuckles turning pure white as he claws at his tailored suit jacket. The walls of the boardroom seem to be closing in on him. He can already hear the church elders demanding the financial records. He can already see the heavily armed federal marshals walking up the steps of his pristine sanctuary with handcuffs. The righteous, untouchable patriarch is completely broken, reduced to a weeping, terrified old man, facing the absolute ruin of his own making. Vivian stares at the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mind entirely shattered by the magnitude of her loss. She slowly raises her hands to her face, dragging her manicured nails down her cheeks, smearing her expensive makeup into an ugly, chaotic mess. She opens her mouth to scream, but the shock has violently robbed her of her voice. Her social empire, her standing in the elite circles of Atlanta society, has evaporated into thin air. She is no longer the wealthy, respected wife of a prominent pastor. She is the wife of a convicted embezzler, completely destitute and utterly disgraced. But it is Jasmine who reacts with the most visceral, unhinged violence. She turns slowly toward Connor, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She had married him for security and status. She had married him because he promised her he could fix this, that his brilliance would secure the fortune and save her family from the impending audit. Now looking at his pale, sweating, utterly defeated face, she realizes she has tethered herself to a spectacular, arrogant failure. "You promised me," Jasmine hisses, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, venomous rage. She steps toward him, her hands curling into tight fists, her eyes blazing with malice. You sat in our living room, and you told my father you had this handled. You told me Nia was a stupid girl who did not understand the law. You told me you were going to crush her and get us the money. Connor takes a frantic step back, raising his hands in a weak, pathetic gesture of defense. Jasmine, please, he stammers, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he backs away. I did not know about the corporate adoption. No one could have seen that coming. It was buried under layers of corporate privacy laws. We can still appeal. We can find a way to challenge the trust in a higher court. I can fix this. You are a liar, Jasmine screams, lunging forward and shoving him violently in the chest. You are a useless, pathetic liar. There is no appeal. You heard him. The money is gone forever. My father is going to jail because of you. We are going to lose the house because of you. You are absolutely nothing. Connor stumbles backward, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished marble. He trips over the leg of his overturned chair and crashes hard onto the floor, the breath violently leaving his lungs. He does not even try to get back up. He just lies there among the scattered, useless legal documents, looking up at the ceiling, completely and utterly destroyed. Mr. Sterling watches the pathetic display with cold, unbothered detachment. He calmly closes his laptop, straightens his gold tie clip, and looks down at the weeping wreckage of the Harrison family. The execution of the Ezekiel Harrison Trust is now concluded. Mr. Sterling announces, his voice easily cutting through the sounds of sobbing and screaming. Security will be arriving in exactly 2 minutes to escort you out of the building. I suggest you gather your belongings and prepare for your respective legal challenges. Good day. The heavy frosted glass doors hiss shut behind Mr. Sterling, sealing his final devastating judgment into the freezing air of the boardroom. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of his footsteps fades down the carpeted hallway, leaving behind a silence so absolute it feels like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the room is the ragged, uneven breathing of my ruined family. Connor remains sprawled on the marble floor, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained with spilled water, staring blindly at the ceiling. Jasmine is curled in her chair, her face buried in her hands, letting out dry, suffocating heaves. Vivian has gone entirely catatonic. She stares at her own distorted reflection in the polished mahogany table, her manicured fingers twitching uselessly at her sides as her social empire turns to ash in her mind. A slow, deliberate push in on Calvin captures the exact second his carefully curated reality completely shatters. The holy, untouchable aura of the great Deacon Calvin evaporates, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, pathetic old man. He is sweating profusely. Thick, greasy beads of moisture roll down his forehead, soaking into the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. His skin has turned a sickly, mottled shade of gray, and his chest heaves as if the oxygen has been sucked out of the room. The righteous fury that defined his entire existence has vanished, replaced by a raw, primal panic that radiates from his trembling frame. He looks at the digital screen mounted on the wall, the bright green lettering confirming the $20 million transfer to my corporate account burning into his retinas. The reality of his failure crashes over him with the force of a tidal wave. He realizes that the security guards are exactly 90 seconds away. He realizes that his salvation, his only remaining lifeline, is standing right in front of him, wearing red-soled shoes and a look of absolute disdain. Nia, Calvin gasps, his deep, booming voice cracking into a frail, desperate wheeze. He stumbles out of his executive chair. His legs, shaking violently under his own weight, refuse to support him. The patriarch of the Harrison family, the man who stood in front of thousands of devoted followers every Sunday to preach about morality and divine judgment, collapses onto the cold marble floor. He crawls. He actually crawls around the edge of the massive mahogany table, dragging his heavy body toward my feet. Please, he begs, tilting his sweating, tear-streaked face up to look at me. You have to listen to me. You have to help me. I am ruined, Nia. I am completely, utterly ruined. I do not take a step back. I do not offer my hand. I stand perfectly still looking down at him with a coldness that borders on absolute zero. I watch the great Deacon Calvin reduced to a groveling, whimpering mess, and I feel absolutely nothing but a deep, satisfying disgust. The church is gone. Calvin chokes out his hands, grasping frantically at the air just inches from my skirt. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 72 hours ago. They are locking the doors on Monday morning. I took it all, Nia. I took the expansion fund. I took the community outreach endowments. I emptied the charity accounts meant for the orphanage in Haiti. I mortgaged the sanctuary twice over using forged signatures from the Board of Elders. His confession spills out of him like toxic sludge, a desperate purge of his darkest, most closely guarded secrets. I gambled it. He sobs, his voice bouncing off the glass walls. I wired millions to offshore sportsbooks in Macau. I chased the losses. I kept thinking the next bet would balance the ledgers, but it just kept getting worse. I owe men who do not send collection agencies, Nia. They send enforcers. They know where I live. They know where your sister lives. Calvin grabs the leg of the boardroom table to pull himself slightly upright, his eyes wild, wide, and bloodshot. On Monday morning, the congregation is bringing in an independent forensic accounting firm. He continues the panic, escalating his voice to a frantic pitch. They are going to open the books. They are going to trace the wire transfers. They are going to hand the evidence directly to the federal prosecutors. I will be indicted for wire fraud, money laundering, and grand theft. I will go to a federal penitentiary for the rest of my natural life. A man like me, a pastor, a public figure, I will not survive in a cage. They will tear me apart. You cannot let me die in prison. He raises his hands, clasping them together in a pathetic, mocking gesture of prayer. I just need $2 million. Calvin pleads, tears streaming freely down his face, cutting through the sweat and grease. Just $2 million. It is only 10% of what Ezekiel gave you. It is a fraction of the trust. If I can wire $2 million to the primary ledger before the bank opens on Monday, I can stall the foreclosure. I can hide the rest of the missing funds in shell companies. I can survive this. I can keep the church. You are my daughter, Nia. Please. I am begging you. You have to save my life. The sheer, blinding audacity of his request hangs in the heavy silence of the room. He casts me out into a freezing blizzard, leaves me to bleed out in a snowy alleyway, and now, 18 years later, he is kneeling at my feet demanding a fraction of my empire to save his pathetic, hypocritical existence. I look down at the sweating, crying man on the floor. I do not see a father. I see a parasite that has finally run out of hosts to bleed dry. You want me to save your life? I say, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper that makes him flinch. You want me to hand over $2 million to cover up your theft and your gambling. You want me to buy back the church you used to condemn me. I turn my back on him. I walk slowly, deliberately back to the center of the boardroom table. Calvin watches me with a sickening spark of hope in his eyes, thinking my silence is a sign of consideration, thinking he has successfully manipulated the daughter he threw away. I reach my hand back into my designer tote bag. I bypass the incorporation papers. I bypass the trust documents. My fingers close around the smooth, heavy cardstock of the second folder I brought with me today. I pull it out, holding it up so the overhead lights catch the thick black ink stamped across the cover. Calvin. I say, my voice ringing with total uncompromising finality. You are not going to federal prison because of the bank. I drop the second folder onto the table. It lands with a heavy, terrifying thud directly in front of his face. You are going to federal prison because of me. The camera executes a slow, deliberate, over-the-shoulder shot from my perspective. We look down past the sharp, immaculate line of my tailored silk blazer directly at Calvin. He is still on his knees, a broken, pathetic figure, trapped on the polished marble floor. His trembling hands hover over the heavy black folder I just dropped in front of his face. He is hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps that sound like a dying animal. Open it, I command, my voice slicing through the dead silence of the boardroom with absolute lethal authority. Calvin flinches at the sound of my voice. His thick, sweaty fingers fumble with the heavy cardstock cover. He throws it open. Inside lies a massive stack of commercial real estate documents stamped with the official seals of the county clerk and several prominent financial institutions. The top page is a notice of default printed in bold, undeniable black ink. His bloodshot eyes scan the paperwork. He sees the address of his massive 30,000 square foot megachurch. He sees the staggering amount of the outstanding principal balance. And then at the very bottom of the page, his eyes lock onto the name of the primary lien holder. Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital. He looks up at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His mouth opens and closes wordlessly. His mind, completely paralyzed by shock, cannot process the catastrophic reality staring him in the face. "You thought I just walked into this building today to collect a check," I say, staring down at him with an expression of pure, icy disdain. "You thought MALIK was just a dormant holding company waiting for Ezekiel's trust to mature. You drastically underestimated my ambition, Calvin. Over the past 5 years, my firm has not been sitting idle. We have been quietly and aggressively buying up distressed commercial real estate across the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. We target bloated, over-leveraged properties held by corrupt individuals." I take a slow, deliberate step closer to him, forcing him to crane his neck backward just to look at me. "Your original lenders were getting nervous, Calvin." I continue, my words falling like heavy stones. "They saw the discrepancies in your quarterly financial reports. They knew the federal auditors were preparing to open a massive investigation into your offshore wire transfers. They knew your church was a toxic asset, a sinking ship waiting to pull them under. So when a private equity firm offered to buy your massive defaulted commercial mortgage for pennies on the dollar, they practically begged us to take it off their hands. They sold you out to save themselves." Calvin lets out a suffocating, guttural gasp. His chest heaves violently as he grips the edge of the mahogany table. "I bought the debt of your church 3 months ago, Calvin." I say, delivering the final fatal blow with perfect surgical precision. "I am the bank, and I am not forgiving your debt. The foreclosure proceeds on Monday." "No!" Calvin screams, his voice cracking into a high-pitched hysterical wail that echoes painfully off the glass walls. "You cannot do this to me. That sanctuary is my life. I built that congregation from the ground up. I am a man of God. You cannot take the house of the Lord and turn it over to the secular courts. It is a sanctuary. It is holy ground." "Holy ground," I repeat, letting out a sharp, venomous laugh. "There is absolutely nothing holy about a building funded by embezzled donations and built on the backs of vulnerable people you exploited. You used that pulpit to preach about morality while you were quietly laundering millions of dollars to pay off your gambling debts. You used that church as a personal piggy bank to fund Vivian's designer wardrobe and Jasmine's lavish lifestyle. It is not a church, Calvin. It is a crime scene. And on Monday morning, the federal authorities are going to treat it exactly like one." Calvin grabs the hem of my skirt, his greasy, sweat-slicked hands leaving dark stains on the pristine fabric. He looks up at me, tears streaming freely down his face, completely abandoning any remaining shred of human dignity. "Nia, please," he begs, his voice reduced to a pathetic, wet sob. "I am your father. I gave you life. You have to find it in your heart to forgive me. The Bible says we must forgive those who trespass against us. If they lock the doors on Monday, the auditors will seize the internal servers. They will see the forged financial statements. They will see everything. I will die in federal prison. Please, I am begging you on my knees before God. Show me mercy." I look down at the groveling, weeping man gripping my clothes. I do not see a father. I see a coward who has finally run out of places to hide. I forcefully pull my skirt out of his grasp, stepping back so he falls forward onto the cold marble floor. "You want to talk about mercy?" I ask, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that instantly silences the entire room. "Where was your mercy 18 years ago? Where was your holy forgiveness when you threw your pregnant, terrified 17-year-old daughter out into a freezing blizzard? You looked me dead in the eyes while I was bleeding, and you told me I was a disgrace to your righteous reputation. You left me to die in a snowy alleyway to protect your precious pulpit. Calvin squeezes his eyes shut, turning his face away in unbearable shame. You prayed for a miracle today, Calvin. I say, my tone radiating absolute crushing finality. And God answered. He sent me. I am your judgment. On Monday morning, my corporate legal team will execute the final foreclosure protocols. The local sheriff will arrive at your massive glass doors with heavy chains and padlocks. The federal agents will follow right behind them to confiscate your servers. Your congregation will arrive for Sunday service to find a foreclosure notice taped to the barricaded gates. They will learn exactly who their beloved pastor truly is. A thief, a degenerate gambler, and a monster who sacrificed his own grandchild to save his reputation. Vivienne lets out a sharp, hysterical shriek from across the room. She scrambles out of her chair, her expensive high heels slipping on the floor as she rushes toward Calvin. She drops to her knees beside him, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying!" "Calvin?" Vivienne screams, her face twisted in pure, unhinged panic. "Tell me the house is not collateral. Tell me we are not going to lose the estate in Buckhead. You promised me we were secure. You promised me the church assets were entirely separate from our personal wealth." Calvin does not answer her. He just lies there on the floor, weeping uncontrollably, his silence confirming her absolute worst fears. Vivienne lets out another piercing wail, covering her face with her hands, as the reality of her impending homelessness crashes down on her. Her social empire, her country club memberships, her entire identity, all of it is completely destroyed. Jasmine remains frozen in her chair, staring at the chaotic, weeping wreckage of her parents on the boardroom floor. She looks at me, her eyes wide with a newfound, terrifying comprehension. She finally realizes the absolute magnitude of the predator she has been mocking her entire life. I do not offer her a single word of comfort. I do not even acknowledge her presence. I simply adjust the cuffs of my silk blouse, turn on my heel, and walk away, leaving them trapped in the spectacular burning ruins of their own deceit. The camera executes a rapid, violent whip pan away from Calvin's sobbing form on the floor, snapping directly onto Jasmine. She is clutching the edges of her heavy leather chair, her knuckles turning bone white as her chest heaves in erratic, shallow gasps. The pristine, untouchable golden child is actively hyperventilating. The absolute, undeniable destruction of her parents has finally pierced her thick armor of entitlement, and she is spiraling into pure, unadulterated panic. "You are a monster!" Jasmine screams, her voice tearing out of her throat in a jagged, hysterical screech. She shoots out of her chair, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished marble as she points a trembling, manicured finger at me. Her face, usually a carefully constructed mask of perfectly contoured superiority, is completely contorted into a grotesque display of terror and rage. "You are a devil, Nia!" Jasmine wails, her voice echoing shrilly in the cavernous boardroom. "You came in here just to destroy your own family. You are pure evil. Dad was right about you. You always were a vindictive, hateful problem. We should have left you in that alley to rot. You are taking everything from us. Do something, Connor." She spins toward her husband, desperately grabbing the sleeve of his wrinkled suit jacket. Her perfectly manicured nails dig fiercely into the expensive fabric as she physically tries to pull him upward, treating him like a weapon she can wield to fix her collapsing reality. "Call the police." Jasmine demands, her voice cracking as she shakes his arm. "Call a judge. Sue her for extortion. She cannot just steal the trust and bankrupt my parents in the exact same day. You are a partner at a corporate firm, Connor. Fix this right now. Destroy her." But Connor does not move to comfort his frantic wife. He does not pull out his phone to call a judge. He slowly, deliberately untangles Jasmine's desperate fingers from his suit sleeve, peeling her away from him with a look of profound, chilling detachment. The panicked, defeated lawyer who was hyperventilating on the floor just moments ago is entirely gone. In his place is a cold, calculating opportunist who has just realized he is standing on a sinking ship, holding a heavy anchor. Connor slowly gets to his feet, ignoring Jasmine completely as he brushes the dust off his tailored trousers. He looks down at Calvin weeping on the floor. He looks at Vivienne, who is staring blankly at the glass wall, completely catatonic. And then he looks at the Delaware Incorporation documents, and the foreclosure notices still resting on the mahogany table. The reality of the situation crystallizes in his predatory mind with absolute terrifying clarity. The Harrison family is not just broke, they are radioactive. They are about to be the epicenter of a massive, highly publicized federal criminal investigation. Connor. Jasmine pleads, her voice dropping to a confused, pathetic whimper as she reaches out for him again. What are you doing? Tell her we are taking her to court. Tell her we are going to ruin her. Connor takes a deliberate step back, putting a harsh physical distance between himself and his wife. He looks at Jasmine, not with love, not with sympathy, but with the cold, assessing glare of a surgeon examining a terminal diagnosis. I am not taking anyone to court. Jasmine. Connor says, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or affection. It is flat, mechanical, and utterly ruthless. Jasmine blinks rapidly, her breath catching painfully in her throat. What do you mean you are not taking her to court? We need that money. My boutique is completely underwater. My suppliers are threatening to sue me by Friday. Dad is losing the church. We need you to fight her. Fight her with what? Connor asks, his tone dripping with heavy condescension. He gestures toward the stack of legal filings. She owns a Tier 1 venture capital firm. She legally executed a bulletproof trust and legally acquired your father's commercial debt. There is no loophole. There is no legal maneuvering. Your family is entirely bankrupt, Jasmine. Worse than bankrupt. Your father is facing multiple federal indictments for wire fraud and embezzlement. The IRS and the FBI are going to seize every single asset tied to the Harrison name. Connor straightens his tie, his posture shifting from a defeated husband to a man fiercely protecting his own survival. You lied to me, Connor continues, his words hitting Jasmine like physical blows. You told me this trust was a guaranteed payout. You told me your father's church was generating millions in clean revenue. You tied me to a family of degenerate criminals. When the federal auditors open those books on Monday, they are going to look for co-conspirators. They are going to investigate anyone connected to your father's finances. I am a partner at a prestigious law firm. I cannot afford to have my name attached to a massive federal embezzlement scandal. I will lose my license. I will lose everything I have built. Jasmine shakes her head, stepping toward him with wild, disbelieving eyes. Connor, please. You are my husband. We are a team. We can figure this out together. My parents can file for bankruptcy. We can sell the boutique. We can start over. There is no we, Jasmine, Connor replies, delivering the ultimate betrayal with chilling precision. Your boutique is a massive liability. Your parents are going to prison. Your entire social standing in this city is about to be annihilated. I am not letting you drag me down into the gutter with you. Connor reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out his smartphone, not looking at his wife, but tapping out a rapid message to his own legal team. I am filing for divorce, Jasmine, Connor announces, not even bothering to look up from his glowing screen. I am filing the paperwork this afternoon. I am freezing our joint accounts, and I am formally severing all legal and financial ties to you and the Harrison family. I will not let the federal government seize my assets to pay for your father's degenerate gambling debts. You are completely on your own. The silence that follows his declaration is absolute and suffocating. Jasmine stands frozen, her arms hovering uselessly in the air. The golden child, the woman who had built her entire identity around her perfect marriage, her wealthy husband, and her untouchable social status, has just been discarded like a piece of worthless trash. The husband she worshipped had just looked at her bank account and decided she was no longer worth the trouble. Jasmine lets out a sound that does not even seem human. It is a hollow, suffocating gasp of total despair. Her legs simply give out beneath her. The golden child collapses onto the boardroom floor, landing right next to her weeping father, sobbing uncontrollably into the cold marble. She has lost her boutique. She has lost her family's entire fortune. She has lost her marriage. And she has lost it all in the span of 30 brutal minutes. I stand silently by the frosted glass doors, looking down at the great Harrison family, weeping in a pathetic, shattered pile on the floor. I breathe in the sweet, intoxicating air of absolute victory, adjust the strap of my designer bag, turn my back on their destruction, and walk out the door. Connor scrambles to his feet, his expensive shoes slipping wildly on the polished marble. He does not offer a single backward glance at the woman he just discarded. His only instinct is pure, unadulterated self-preservation. He adjusts his ruined suit jacket, his breath hitching in his throat, and practically sprints toward the frosted glass doors. He wants to escape the boardroom. He wants to put as much physical distance between himself and the radioactive fallout of the Harrison family before the federal agents start asking questions. The camera executes a smooth, rapid tracking shot following Connor as he lunges for the exit. But I am already standing at the threshold. I do not move out of his way. I simply shift my weight, blocking the heavy glass door from opening. Connor stops dead in his tracks. He looks terrified, a cornered rat trapped in a cage of his own making. "Move, Nia!" Connor snaps his voice, a pathetic, trembling whisper. He refuses to make eye contact with me. "I have nothing to do with this anymore. I am severing my ties to your father. I am leaving Jasmine. I am entirely out of this family. You got your money. You got your revenge. Now step aside and let me leave." I look at him, taking in the sheer cowardice radiating from his sweat-slicked face. "You really think you can just file for divorce and walk away clean?" I ask, my voice echoing off the glass walls with a chilling melodic cadence. "You think you can feast on the Harrison wealth for a decade? Enjoy the prestige of my father's stolen money scheme to steal my inheritance and then just sprint for the fire exit when the ship starts to sink?" Connor swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I did not steal anything," he stammers, raising his hands defensively. "I was just acting as legal counsel. I was giving them standard fiduciary advice. I am a partner at a respectable firm. I have my own career. I have my own assets." "A respectable firm," I repeat, letting a cold, mocking smile spread across my face. "Yes, the prestigious law offices of Sterling Vance and Hughes, located in that beautiful historic commercial high-rise right in the center of the financial district. It is a stunning building, Connor. The architecture is truly impeccable." Connor blinks, his brow furrowing in deep, terrified confusion. He does not understand why I am complimenting his office building. But the slow, creeping dread in his eyes tells me his subconscious has already figured it out. "You are a partner, Connor." I continue, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Which means your name is on the commercial lease. You and your two senior partners signed a binding 10-year contract for the entire top floor. But your building management company recently went through a major liquidation phase. They packaged a series of commercial properties into a distressed asset portfolio and sold them to a private equity firm to avoid bankruptcy." Connor stops breathing. The blood drains completely from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. "My firm bought that portfolio 2 weeks ago," I say, delivering the final fatal strike. "Minority Access and Legacy Investment Capital now owns the building your law practice leases. I am your landlord, Connor, and after reviewing the property valuations, I realized your firm was paying significantly below market value, so I exercised the owner override clause buried in Section 4 of your lease agreement. Your rent just tripled effective immediately." Connor lets out a choked, suffocating gasp. He grabs the front of his shirt, his chest heaving as if he is having a physical heart attack. "You cannot afford a triple rent increase," I say, watching his reality shatter all over again. "Your partners cannot afford it either. You are going to default by the end of the month. I am going to evict your prestigious law firm, seize your business assets for breach of contract, and completely bankrupt your practice. You are not walking away from this, Connor. I am taking everything you have built. Have a blessed day." I step aside gracefully, clearing the path to the door. Connor does not say a single word. He cannot. His mind is completely broken. He pushes past me, stumbling blindly through the heavy glass doors, and runs down the carpeted hallway of the executive suite. He runs like a beaten dog, his shoulders hunched, his breath hitching in loud, panicked sobs that echo down the corridor. I turn back to face the boardroom. The tracking shot follows my gaze, panning rapidly back to the center of the room. Jasmine is still on the floor, hyperventilating violently. She has just watched her husband, her only remaining lifeline to high society and financial security, flee the building in total disgrace. She is completely isolated, stripped of her boutique, her marriage, and her unearned wealth. Jasmine drags herself across the polished marble, her expensive designer dress soaking up the water from the overturned crystal pitcher. She crawls toward Vivian, grabbing the hem of her mother's pristine skirt. Mom. Jasmine wails, her voice a shrill, agonizing screech. Mom, you have to help me. Connor is leaving me. He is freezing the accounts. My suppliers are going to take my store. The bank is going to take my house. Please, Mom, you have to call your friends at the country club. You have to ask for a loan. We can hire a new lawyer. We can fix this. Please look at me. But Vivian does not look at her. Vivian does not even register that her favorite daughter is sobbing at her feet. The great matriarch of the Harrison family is completely catatonic. She sits rigidly in her heavy leather chair, her eyes wide, vacant, and completely unblinking. Her trembling hands are gripping the commercial foreclosure deed I dropped on the table. She is staring at the thick black ink detailing the total, undeniable destruction of her husband's megachurch. My charities, Vivian whispers to the empty air, her voice a raspy, disconnected murmur. My gala tickets, the women at the country club. They are going to see the police tape on the sanctuary doors. They are going to watch Calvin on the evening news in handcuffs. Susan and Margaret are going to laugh at me. They are going to expel me from the board of directors. I will have to shop at discount stores. I will have to sell my jewelry. Mom. Jasmine screams, shaking Vivian's leg frantically. Stop talking about the country club. We are completely broke. I need you to help me. Vivian violently kicks her leg, knocking Jasmine's hands away. Do not touch me, Jasmine. Vivian snaps, her eyes flashing with a sudden terrifying madness. Do not touch my dress. You are wrinkling the silk. How am I supposed to attend the spring gala if you wrinkle my silk? Calvin promised me we were buying a new summer home in the Hamptons. He promised me. Jasmine falls back onto her hands and knees, staring at her mother in sheer horror. She realizes in that brutal, unforgiving moment that Vivian has completely lost her grip on reality. The shock of losing her wealth and her social status has fractured Vivian's fragile, narcissistic mind. She is entirely incapable of saving herself, let alone saving her daughter. I stand silently by the door, watching the golden child realize that she is finally, truly alone. Jasmine curls into a tight ball on the wet marble floor, wrapping her arms around her knees and burying her face in her chest. Her loud, jagged sobs fill the boardroom, harmonizing perfectly with Calvin's quiet, defeated weeping and Vivian's delusional, disconnected murmurs. The glorious, untouchable Harrison family has been reduced to a pathetic display of greed, cowardice, and total madness. It is a masterpiece of destruction painted with their own arrogance. The heavy silence in the room is suddenly broken by the sharp rustle of silk. Vivian snaps out of her catatonic stupor, the delusion shattering as the reality of Connor's departure and the impending foreclosure finally pierces her shock. She looks around the room, her eyes darting from her sobbing husband to her weeping golden child, before finally locking onto me. The extreme low angle captures my towering presence as Vivian scrambles across the floor. She throws herself at my feet, her hands desperately clutching the fabric of my tailored designer skirt. Nia, my beautiful baby girl, Vivian cries, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. Thick, heavy tears cascade down her perfectly powdered cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She looks up at me with wide, pleading eyes, weaponizing the very concept of motherhood. You cannot do this. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave you life, Nia. You are my flesh and blood. Please look into your heart and remember the bond we share. You cannot destroy the woman who gave you life. Her performance is masterful. The tears are real. The desperation is palpable. And for a fraction of a second, I see the exact manipulation tactic she has used to control this family for decades. I violently step backward, ripping the silk of my skirt out from her grasping fingers with such force that she falls forward onto her hands. Do not ever use that word with me, I spit, my voice dripping with absolute venomous disgust. You lost the right to call yourself my mother the night you watched Calvin throw me out into a freezing blizzard and said absolutely nothing. You stood in the hallway sipping a glass of wine and watched your 17-year-old daughter get dragged out into the snow to protect your social standing. Vivian chokes on a sob, shaking her head frantically as she reaches for my ankles. I step entirely out of her reach, looking down at her with eyes as cold as the winter night she abandoned me to. You want to talk about the bond of flesh and blood, I ask, my tone dropping to a lethal razor-sharp whisper. Let us talk about Grandma's antique emerald necklace, the heirloom she explicitly left to me in her will before she passed away. The one thing in this world I actually cherished. Do you remember what you did with my inheritance, Vivian? Vivian freezes, the fake tears abruptly stopping as the color completely drains from her face. You sold it. I say, the memory of that betrayal fueling the fire in my chest. You took my dead grandmother's jewelry, walked into a pawn shop in Buckhead, and sold it for $50,000. And what did you do with that money? Did you put it in a college fund for me? Did you use it to help me when I was working 3 shifts at a diner just to afford ramen noodles and rent for a moldy studio apartment? No. You took the money from my inheritance and bought Jasmine a brand new convertible for her sweet 16. You let me starve while you bought your golden child a luxury vehicle with my stolen legacy. Vivian opens her mouth, stammering, trying to form a cohesive sentence, trying to spin another lie, but the sheer weight of her exposed cruelty suffocates her. Those tears might work on the women at your country club, I continue, towering over her trembling form. They might work on the pathetic men who fund your lavish lifestyle. But they will never work on me again. You are not a mother. You are a parasite hiding behind expensive clothes and fake pearls. Save your tears, Vivian. You are going to need every single one of them when the federal marshals arrive to seize your mansion on Monday. I do not wait for Vivian to formulate another pathetic excuse. I simply raise my right hand and snap my fingers once. The sharp, singular sound cuts through her sobbing like a gunshot. Instantly, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom swing open. 4 towering men in immaculate black suits step into the room. They are my personal corporate security detail, hand-picked and highly trained professionals who do not ask questions and certainly do not show mercy. A smooth Steadicam shot tracks backwards, staying fixed on my cold, unyielding expression as I watch the final act of this pathetic drama unfold. Take out the trash, I command, my voice echoing with absolute corporate authority. The guards move with terrifying practiced efficiency. 2 of them flank Calvin, grabbing him by his sweat-soaked arms and hauling his heavy, trembling body off the marble floor. He lets out a fresh, high-pitched wail of panic, his legs kicking uselessly as they drag him toward the exit. The great pastor is completely limp, utterly broken by the reality of his impending federal imprisonment. He is blubbering about salvation, his words slurring together into a meaningless, pathetic drone. The other 2 guards zero in on Vivian. She shrieks, thrashing wildly as they clamp their massive hands onto her delicate shoulders. She screams about her designer clothes, threatening to sue my firm, threatening to call the governor, but her frantic threats are met with absolute stony silence. They forcefully hoist her to her feet, completely ignoring her kicking heels and flailing arms. She looks absolutely feral, the pristine mask of the wealthy matriarch entirely shredded. Jasmine remains curled on the floor, weeping hysterically into her ruined dress. A 5th guard steps into the room, looming over her shaking frame. He does not even need to touch her. He simply points a gloved finger toward the hallway, a silent, menacing order that forces her to frantically scramble to her feet. She stumbles after her parents, her face heavily smeared with black mascara, looking like a terrified child rather than the arrogant socialite who walked into this building just an hour ago. The tracking shot continues backward, capturing the wide, panoramic view as the security detail forces the Harrison family out of the executive boardroom and into the main corporate corridor. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my headquarters offer a perfect, unobstructed view of their deeply humiliating exit. Dozens of my employees, the sharpest venture capitalists and financial analysts in the entire city, stop whatever they are doing. They stand at their sleek glass desks and watch the spectacular downfall. Calvin is crying loudly, begging the stone-faced guards to let him speak to me one last time. Vivian is screaming at the top of her lungs, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly around her face, as she desperately tries to claw at the men dragging her toward the elevators. Jasmine trails behind them, sobbing loudly, her head hung in total crushing shame as the wealthy, powerful employees of MALIK stare at her with absolute disgust. They watch the so-called perfect family, the untouchable pillars of Atlanta high society, being physically thrown out of the building like common trespassers. There is absolutely no grace in their exit. There is only raw, unfiltered public humiliation. I stand perfectly still at the head of the mahogany boardroom table, smoothing the lapels of my silk blazer. I watch them disappear into the elevator bay. The steel doors slide shut permanently, sealing them in the prison of their own making. The heavy steel doors of the elevator slide shut with a satisfying final click. The muffled echoes of Vivian's shrieks and Calvin's pathetic sobbing instantly cut off, leaving the executive suite bathed in absolute pristine silence. I stand there for a moment, letting the profound quiet wash over me. For 25 years, my life was scored by their constant criticisms, their loud demands, and their relentless emotional abuse. Now there is nothing but the gentle hum of the central air conditioning and the distant sounds of downtown Atlanta traffic far below. I turn away from the glass walls and walk slowly back toward the center of the room. The sweeping Steadicam shot transitions seamlessly into a slow, graceful crane shot, rising smoothly toward the high ceiling. It captures my solitary figure moving across the polished marble floor, taking my rightful place at the head of the massive mahogany boardroom table, the seat of power, the throne they tried so desperately to keep from me. Mr. Sterling, the senior trust manager who has been quietly observing the entire spectacle from the corner of the room, steps forward. He does not look shocked by the brutal eviction of the Harrison family. If anything, there is a distinct gleam of professional respect in his eyes. He understands exactly what just happened. A hostile takeover in its purest, most unapologetic form. He opens a thick leather portfolio and extracts a single crisp sheet of parchment paper. He smooths it flat on the mahogany surface right in front of me, tapping a manicured finger next to the final signature line. The transfer of the primary Harrison Trust assets into the MALIK corporate holding account. He says, his voice a low, steady rumble of total finality. With this, their remaining capital, the estate deeds and the commercial portfolios are entirely under your sole jurisdiction. I reach into the breast pocket of my tailored silk blazer and retrieve a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. The metal is cool and solid against my skin. I uncap it with a smooth twist. I do not hesitate. I do not feel a single ounce of guilt or remorse. I press the gold nib to the paper and sign my name with sweeping, aggressive strokes. The dark ink binds the legal reality to my absolute victory. The Harrison Empire is officially dead. My empire has officially begun. Mr. Sterling smiles warmly, sliding the portfolio closed. Congratulations, Madam CEO. The boardroom doors open softly. My executive assistant steps inside carrying a silver tray with a single crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. The golden liquid bubbles and dances in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I take the glass, the cool crystal grounding me in the reality of this phenomenal triumph. There is no more screaming. There is no more manipulation. There is no more family holding me back. I turn away from the table and look up at the far wall of the boardroom. Hanging there, framed in dark oak, is the original oil portrait of great-grandfather Ezekiel, the man who truly built the foundation of our family's wealth, the man whose legacy Calvin and Vivian almost squandered on their pathetic vanity. I raise the crystal flute toward the painting, the rising crane shot capturing the absolute serenity on my face. "We did it, Grandpa," I whisper into the quiet room. "The legacy is safe." The golden sunlight flooding the mahogany boardroom slowly shifts, dissolving seamlessly into the rich, velvety twilight of my penthouse living room. The transition is smooth, pulling us away from the corporate battlefield and back to the quiet sanctuary where this entire orchestration began. I am standing by the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the glittering expanse of the Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretch out for miles, a sprawling sea of electricity and power, and I know that I control a massive piece of it. The camera executes a slow, deliberate orbit, circling my silhouette against the glowing backdrop of the city. I turn slowly, my gaze breaking away from the window to look directly into the lens. I am speaking directly to you now, stripping away the corporate armor and leaving only the cold, unyielding truth. People love to repeat that tired old proverb. They say blood is thicker than water. They use it as a weapon, a manipulative guilt trip designed to keep you chained to people who do absolutely nothing but pull you under the surface. They use it to justify abuse, neglect, and profound betrayal, but they always conveniently forget the actual original quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we actively choose, the alliances we forge in the brutal fires of our own ambition, those are the ties that actually bind. The water of the womb gave me Calvin, Vivian, and Jasmine. It gave me a family of parasites who watched me freeze and did absolutely nothing. Society constantly preaches that it takes a village. They tell you to rely on your family, to lean on your kin when times get unimaginably hard. But what do you do when your village is the exact entity trying to destroy you? What do you do when your own parents physically drag you out into a blinding, freezing blizzard, lock the heavy oak doors, and leave you to die in the snow? I will tell you exactly what you do. You do not cry. You do not beg for them to let you back inside. You do not waste a single second of your life trying to build a new village. You build an empire. You build a fortress of absolute untouchable power, cemented with your own blood, sweat, and relentless determination. The camera continues its graceful rotation, pushing in closer and closer until it fills the frame with an extreme close-up of my face. My eyes are dark, focused, and utterly devoid of mercy. They thought they could just waltz back into my life after a decade of complete silence. They came looking for a vulnerable grandson to exploit a naive, broken girl they could easily manipulate into funding their pathetic, crumbling illusions of grandeur. They fully expected to find a victim. Instead, they met the CEO, who owned their entire existence. They met the architect of their total, unavoidable destruction. I hold the gaze of the lens, my voice dropping to a low, resonant whisper of pure victory. I am Nia. I am Malik, and the debt is fully paid. Blackout.